June 1967. Somewhere in South Vietnam. The jungle is quiet, but never still. Tall grass bends without wind. Leaves drip from the last rainstorm. Insects hum in uneven rhythms that never fully stop. American soldiers move carefully along a narrow trail, weapons raised. Eyes scanning shadows that seem to move on their own. There are no enemy formations ahead, no tanks, no visible front line, and yet every step feels watched. This is not a battlefield where armies meet face to face. There is no clear direction of danger. The enemy does not wear uniforms. He does not advance in columns or retreat when pressed. He waits. For the American soldiers fighting here, the war is not defined by territory gained or cities captured. It is defined by uncertainty, by the constant sense that the enemy is present, but never fully visible. This is the story of those soldiers, and the war they fought against an enemy they could rarely see. From the moment American combat troops arrived in Vietnam, the war defied familiar rules. Unlike previous conflicts, Vietnam did not offer clear battle lines. There was no front stretching across a map. Control shifted village by village, often hour by hour. Enemy forces blended into civilian populations, appearing as farmers by day and fighters by night. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army understood something fundamental. They did not need to defeat the United States militarily. They only needed to deny American certainty. They used concealment as a weapon. Jungle terrain provided natural cover. Thick vegetation absorbed sound. Narrow trails limited visibility. Underground tunnel systems allowed entire units to disappear. Without a trace, American soldiers trained for conventional warfare found themselves in a conflict where conventional instincts often failed. Patrols moved slowly. Ambushes came without warning. Firefights erupted suddenly and ended just as fast. Often, the enemy vanished before air support or artillery could be brought in. Victory could not be measured by ground held. It had to be measured in endurance. The most difficult burden for many American soldiers was not combat itself, but anticipation. In Vietnam, danger rarely announced itself. A single shot from the tree line could wound or kill. A pressure plate buried beneath a trail could detonate without warning. A village that appeared peaceful could conceal fighters only moments away from attack. Every civilian interaction carried uncertainty. This constant tension wore down even the most disciplined troops. Sleep came lightly. Movements were cautious. Trust eroded not because soldiers lacked compassion, but because the war punished certainty. Unlike traditional battles, there were few moments of release. No decisive charges. No clear victories. No sense that the enemy had been pushed back permanently. Instead, soldiers returned to the same areas again and again, fighting the same battles with no visible change. The enemy remained invisible but never absent. One of the most effective tools used by the Viet Cong was the booby trap, punji, stakes, tripwires, improvised, explosive devices. These weapons were simple, cheap, and devastating. They did not require direct engagement. They could be placed quietly and left behind. Their purpose was not always to kill but to maim. A wounded soldier required evacuation, medics, helicopters, protection. Each injury slowed operations and strained morale. Booby traps transformed the environment itself into a threat. Every step became deliberate. Every movement carried risk. Soldiers learned to watch the ground as much as the jungle ahead. Yet no amount of vigilance could guarantee safety. The enemy did not need to be present to inflict damage. He had already been. Their American strategy relied heavily on search and destroy missions. Units were inserted into areas believed to contain enemy forces. They swept through villages, jungles, and river valleys, searching for signs of activity. When contact was made, overwhelming firepower was used to eliminate resistance. But the enemy rarely fought on American terms. When confronted, Viet Cong units disengaged quickly. They avoided prolonged battles. They knew American firepower was overwhelming when concentrated. Instead, they faded back into the environment. After-action reports recorded enemy casualties. Body counts were tallied. Success was measured statistically, but soldiers on the ground understood the truth. The enemy returned. The same trails were used again. The same villages remained contested. The same ambush sites reappeared. Search and destroy missions could clear an area, but they could not hold it. The invisible enemy simply waited. Beneath the jungles of Vietnam, another war was being fought underground. The Viet Cong built extensive tunnel systems that stretched for miles. These tunnels housed command centers, supply depots, hospitals, and living quarters. Some were deep enough to survive bombing. Others were designed to collapse if discovered. for American soldiers. Tunnels represented the ultimate expression of invisibility. Enemy forces could attack, retreat underground, and re-emerge elsewhere. Air power and artillery often had little effect. Specialized units known as tunnel rats were tasked with entering these confined spaces. Armed with pistols, flashlights, and little else, they crawled into darkness filled with unknown threats, traps, snakes, explosives, armed fighters. This was combat reduced to its most intimate form. There were no formations, no support, no margin for error. The enemy could be inches away and seen. Unheard, Vietnam forced American soldiers into morally complex situations. The invisible enemy relied on civilian populations for concealment and support. Villages became contested spaces not because civilians were uniformly hostile, but because allegiance was often forced or fluid. Soldiers were tasked with protecting civilians while also suspecting them. This contradiction was impossible to resolve cleanly. Mistakes had consequences. Restraint had risks. Aggression carried moral cost. The enemy exploited this tension. Every civilian death fueled resentment. Every destroyed village strengthened the narrative of occupation. American soldiers were not fighting an enemy that needed to win battles. They were fighting an enemy that needed to survive. And survival depended on invisibility. The United States brought unprecedented technology to Vietnam. Helicopters revolutionized mobility. Sensors attempted to detect movement along supply routes. Aircraft delivered overwhelming firepower within minutes. But technology struggled against adaptation. The enemy moved at night. They avoided large concentrations. They used decoys. They accepted losses. When sensors were deployed, movement shifted. When bombing intensified, dispersion increased. Every technological advantage produced a countermeasure. The war became a contest not of superiority but of endurance, and endurance favored the side willing to wait. Vietnam was the first war experienced in near real time by the American public. Television cameras captured firefights, evacuations, and casualties. But the invisible nature of the enemy created a disconnect. Viewers saw explosions, but not progress. They saw battles, but not resolution. Airstrikes and body counts did not translate into visible momentum. The war appeared endless. And when a war feels endless, confidence erodes. The invisible enemy did not need to defeat American forces militarily. He only needed to remain unseen long enough. For the American soldier, Vietnam was exhausting in ways few previous wars had been. The climate drained energy. The uncertainty drained focus. The constant threat drained morale. Many soldiers completed tours without ever seeing a clear enemy force. They experienced ambushes, mines, and sudden violence, but rarely decisive engagements. This ambiguity followed them home. Vietnam veterans often struggled to explain their experiences. There were no clear victories to point to, no lines crossed, no cities liberated and held. They had fought and survived a war defined by shadows. In early 1968, the invisible enemy briefly became visible. During the Tet Offensive, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched coordinated attacks across South Vietnam. Cities, towns, and military installations were struck. For a moment, the enemy emerged openly. American forces responded with overwhelming strength. Most attacks were repelled. Enemy losses were immense, but the psychological impact was profound. The enemy had demonstrated reach, coordination, and resilience despite years of combat and bombing. When the enemy vanished again after Tet, the illusion of progress vanished with him. The invisible war could no longer be explained away. The enemy's strength lay not in firepower, but in strategy. He chose when to fight. He chose where to appear. He chose when to disappear. American forces controlled the air. They controlled firepower. They controlled technology, but they could not control time. And in Vietnam, time was the decisive factor. By the early 1970s, American involvement in Vietnam wound down. The war did not end with a decisive battlefield victory. It ended with negotiation, withdrawal, and uncertainty for American soldiers. The experience reshaped military thinking. Future doctrine emphasized counterinsurgency, population security, intelligence, political legitimacy. Vietnam taught a hard lesson. Not every enemy can be confronted directly. Not every war can be won by force alone. The American soldiers who fought in Vietnam did not lack courage. They faced an enemy who understood invisibility better than firepower, an enemy who turned terrain, civilians, and time into weapons. They fought without clear lines, without clear victories, without clear endings, and yet they endured. Their story is not one of failure but of confrontation with the limits of power. In Vietnam, the most dangerous enemy was not always the one who fired the shot. It was the one who remained unseen.